Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I despise one aspect of my work more than anything else: receiving late-night phone calls. When it arrives, it indicates only one thing: murder. I've been a murder investigator for more than 15 years, and I've seen the worst side of what a so-called civilized man can do to another. Oddly, my experience in the Marines was less bloody. Yes, there was battle and we murdered, but the true evil occurred at home, among our own people. Retirement is less than 3 weeks away, and I'll embrace it just as much as I do my wife every night. My wife is an amazing lady, full of passion, and these late-night calls bother her more than they do me. This one, however, seemed to hurt her much more than usual, most likely because she anticipated the last call would be the last before I retired. She wanted my career to conclude without another murder looming over us. My wife had just been in bed with me for a few hours. She had a rare night out with a group of her friends. They do not go crazy at a butcher store looking for males or go staggering drunk. A handful of them come together every now and then to cleanse their minds from the monotonous day-to-day lives we all lead. Her buddies are all high-achieving ladies who grew up together. Each of them is in a long-term marriage, exactly like me and Sophia. When I received the call details, I realized it was going to be a problem. Sophia could tell by my look that things were not going well. "Who is it, Robert?" she inquired. I stared at her, unsure if I believed it. "It's Daniel and Rebecca Miller. We were once quite close. We were neighbors while the kids were little, but as they went away, we all became preoccupied with our own occupations, leaving little time to sustain the bond we had. My lieutenant must have felt awful about calling me out while I was so close to retirement." Sophia watched me dress with worry on her face. If I hadn't known better, I believe she knew something. I was in police mode by now and had a task to do. "Okay, Sophia, spill it. You know something. I can tell you and I have been together too long to start hiding things from each other." "What do you know?" "I don't know anything, Robert," she said. When I gave her the look I typically give when I know she's keeping anything back, she decided it was best to let it go. "Okay, I saw Rebecca last week having lunch with some guy, and it seemed to me they were awfully friendly with each other." "They were too friendly, if you get my drift." "How come you didn't mention that you talked to Rebecca last week?" "I figured you would have caught up with her and seen how she and Daniel were doing." "I told you, she was too friendly with the guy she was with, and I didn't feel comfortable talking to her about it. What she was doing with the guy wasn't right. It was a disgusting display, even from a distance. It gave me the creeps." "What did this guy look like?" "Early to mid-30s, well over 6 feet tall, short blonde hair, dressed in a grey business suit." "Anything besides them acting inappropriate bother you about them?" "Trust me, honey, that was enough. You know how I feel about cheaters." Asking Sophia any more about what she saw between Rebecca and this man would have been pointless. When she said cheaters, everything was gone. We've seen far too many marriages collapse over the years because some moron, male or female, thought their wedding vows were no longer important. We both dislike cheats and feel they deserve the consequences when detected. I did, however, feel that murder was a touch extreme. I kissed my wife and went out. As I approached the Miller home, I observed the coroner had already arrived and was dealing with the dead. As I approached the home, I saw numerous soldiers keeping the crowd away. They did take a few seconds to give me a few old guy jokes. Everyone knew I was just shy of mandatory, so they thought I was an old man. My lieutenant was waiting for me, which was uncommon. I suppose he wanted to assess my neutrality and capacity to execute my work since I previously had a personal contact with the victims. He was certain I would be okay, and in the long run, he thought having me on the case would be advantageous since I would try harder to solve their murders. I asked him how horrible it was inside. He shook his head and gave me booties for my shoes. I could see the blood spatter from the doorway. Whatever transpired occurred in the front room. I had just finished putting on my boots when one of the rookie officers dashed outside and emptied his guts in the bushes. A couple of his pals teased him, but I'd been there before, so I didn't respond. There wasn't much to see after crossing the threshold, but when I entered the living room, the image caught my attention. An unclothed guy of unknown height lay on the floor, the victim of 2 shotgun blasts. His height was uncertain since his skull was missing, or more accurately, splattered all over the wall near the fireplace mantel. The second shot was aimed directly at his genitals. Whoever did this was clearly upset and wanted to make a point. The second corpse was female, somewhat naked, and looked to be undressing or covering up. She was slain with a single shotgun blow to the chest at point-blank range. Her heart was gone. I understood what this meant. Rebecca Miller was the female victim. I was aware that the man on the floor was not Daniel. Even though his head was gone, the guy on the floor was taller than Daniel. Daniel wasn't particularly tall, but he was always well built from exercise and construction work. He had his own firm and was not afraid to get his hands dirty. He always wanted to work among his guys rather than sitting in an office. I admired him for that. Upon initial investigation of the situation, it seemed that Daniel returned home and handled business in the only manner he knew how. He took away lover boy's beautiful looks and the instrument he used to steal his wife from him. Then, when Rebecca ripped his heart out, he returned the favor. The firearm was dropped on the ground between the two lovers. The gun cupboard in the den across the hall was open, and 7-gauge ammunition were loose on the desk nearby. A quick count revealed that the box was fresh, with 4 shells missing. They were easy to account for 3 rounds to the bodies and 1 in the shotgun chamber. Daniel's fingerprints on the shotgun meant nothing since it was his gun, but if they were on the shells, this would be an easy case to solve. The box of shells was fresh, and there was a little smear of blood on the lid's edge. The murderer most likely sliced their finger on the edge while attempting to pry it open in a hurry. Daniel would have been quite upset at the moment, his hands trembling uncontrollably as he prepared to shoot his wife and her boyfriend. The specialists on the forensic team were responsible for determining if the blood was his. If I was very fortunate, they'd discover his bloody fingerprint on the shotgun's trigger. If Daniel was the murderer, the district attorney would portray the case as follows: husband returns home, discovers his wife with her lover, and snaps, a simple crime of passion. Daniel would most certainly get a brief jail term, but he'd still be bobbing for apples with a prison mate for a few years. It took many hours for the crime scene investigators to map everything. I went home till it was time for my shift to start. Sophia, unsurprisingly, remained up, waiting for my return. I informed her Rebecca was dead, and her boyfriend was most likely also dead. She approached me and embraced me fiercely, saying she would miss her old friend but not the one who would openly and publicly cheat on her husband. When she inquired about Daniel, all I could tell her was that he was sought for questioning, but that was all for the time being until the murder scene was thoroughly investigated. There was no concrete evidence that identified him as the murderer. Following a 2-hour siesta, I drove to the precinct. The basic report would still take a few hours, but I informed the lieutenant that I was heading down to Miller's construction company. When Daniel arrived at work, he found a squad vehicle waiting to take him into prison. I hoped a pleasant face would make things simpler. When he arrived, the office was already open. The patrol officers had previously inquired about Daniel and were informed that he was out of town bidding on a contract. Daniel's secretary had been attempting to reach him for the previous half hour. Daniel was not answering his phone, but she was able to learn that his appointment had been postponed until later in the morning at his request. He had an appointment with a firm in Fairview, and since it was a lengthy trip, he booked a hotel room the night before so he could make the early morning appointment. I knew if he decided to kill his wife and her boyfriend, he'd have plenty of time to drive home, conduct the killings, and return in time for his original appointment. So why the delay? Showing there as scheduled would have bolstered his alibi. Because the meeting was set very early in the morning, not attending was a red signal to his participation. Unable to reach Daniel, it was agreed to have the police vehicle drive by on a regular basis, just in case he turned up. A call to the hotel verified his check-in time of 8:25 p.m. yesterday night. I also phoned the mobile phone carrier and pinged his phone. His phone did not show up on the mobile tower finder. His phone was not switched off, it was just not registering with the towers. The emergency location feature cannot be turned off either. Either the battery was fully depleted, or he had taken it from the phone. My lieutenant authorized the trip to Fairview. If nothing else, I owed it to my erstwhile buddy to personally come there and take him into prison for interrogation. The journey was uneventful until I encountered some road work. The Department of Transportation has a bad tendency of taking all-or-nothing approaches to road rehabilitation. You're either losing your suspension in a bus-sized pothole, or you're sitting motionless on the highway until they figure out how to patch it. A routine 2-hour commute turned into a 3-hour cussfest, and if the transport department stuck to their usual bullshit, the route was confined to one lane only until 6 to 5 p.m., and after 6 to 5 p.m., they very well locked the roads down while they seemed to be busy standing about. To make things worse, overhead power wires were being laid over the same stretch of road, causing even lengthier delays. The state troopers faced a scheduling dilemma. I felt a strong connection to my police enforcement brethren. When I arrived to Hamilton Realty Experts, the first thing I noticed was the lack of Daniel's vehicle. I checked in with the firm president's personal assistant, who informed me that Daniel was there and was now presenting his offer to the board. He had been at their office for about 2 hours. The meeting was anticipated to terminate at any time since the president had another meeting planned just after. 3 construction businesses passed the first screening, and each was eligible to compete for the general contractor position. It was a highly appealing bid. Bonuses were provided as incentives to meet not just scheduling requirements but also construction quality. I requested some of the president's time before his next meeting. The assistant went into the conference room and returned with a permission for a few minutes, but nothing more. While we were waiting in the foyer, another general contractor arrived to make his presentation to Hamilton Realty. You could see he was anxious. If I judged correctly, his abilities were better suited to the building side of the firm than schmoozing customers. He must have just come off the job since he was still removing dirt from his shoes, and his hands revealed the wear and tear of years of hard labor. Daniel emerged 15 minutes later, smiling broadly, shaking hands with Hamilton Realty's president and board members. Needless to say, he was taken aback to find me standing there, but he kept his cool and approached me as if we were old friends. Pulling him over to the side, I softly ordered him to wait for me outside and not attempt to leave. His doing so would be disastrous for him. His expression remained concerned, but when he said he'd be waiting outside, I knew he meant it. My time with the firm president was helpful. The 3 firms were competing on a $6 million office building as well as a multi-million-dollar 5-year building maintenance contract. The construction and maintenance tasks might be awarded to various businesses, although all were required to submit bids for both. The president informed me that one of the bidders was once a regional powerhouse until a few construction mishaps and poor craftsmanship harmed their image. They were now attempting to recover their previous level of reputation. He was a fair guy who was prepared to offer them a chance at repentance, but he was more skeptical of their request than of the others. The 3rd firm was a rising star with excellent recommendations. He questioned if they had the resources for the building part of the task, but the maintenance side was well within their capabilities. He was the underdog among the 3. When I queried him about Daniel's firm's chances, he responded that although Daniel and his company were the chosen bidder for building, they were not necessarily the favored bidder for maintenance. The president was concerned about why I was there, questioning one of the persons he was considering for a significant construction. I told him straight Daniel's wife was killed during the night, and as part of a standard inquiry, I wanted to establish his location. He requested that I consider Daniel a suspect. I informed him that, as a detective, everyone is a suspect unless proof shows otherwise. However, I described our previous connection, and if he was the guy I knew, I did not hold him accountable for his wife's death. That appeared to satisfy him for the time being, but he requested that I keep him updated on any information that, while not obstructing my research, would be useful to his building project. Too much money and too many people's livelihoods were at risk. Because there was a probable killer outside, I couldn't stay away from him for long. Walking outside the workplace, Daniel was waiting outside my vehicle, exactly as he had promised. "What the hell is going on, Robert? Why are you here and why are you after me?" He seemed genuinely startled that I was there. "I thought after last night you'd have figured that out on your own." "What the hell are you talking about, Robert?" "Rebecca, Daniel. You killing Rebecca?" His eyes widened and his lips fell open in disbelief. Before I knew it, he was crying. He collapsed against my vehicle, barely holding himself up. As a seasoned officer, I've seen every playing role a person can take to attempt to avoid a murder charge, but here was a guy who seemed to be unaware his wife had died. "Robert, did you just say I killed Rebecca?" he said, his voice cracking. "I couldn't kill her. I loved her." Past tense, interesting, I reflected to myself. She was nothing but a cheating woman, but she was still the mother of our kids. I wouldn't kill her just for that. He was aware of our intentions. Daniel, why haven't you been answering your phone? And where is your car? I could see he was still processing his wife's death when he began telling me about how he confronted her and her boyfriend at his home. He said that he did not like her lover's presence in his house and he shoved the man about a bit. But that was it. He did inform her that since the home was in his name exclusively, he wanted her to leave and that she would be served with divorce papers as soon as he could contact his lawyer. When I questioned him about his vehicle again, he said that he had snagged some line wrap from the overhead utility work and pulled it all the way to the hotel where he was staying. This was the reason for postponing this morning's appointment. His vehicle was in a nearby garage and he planned to pick it up right after his meeting so he could drive home. Actually, he planned to stay in a hotel for a few days until Rebecca moved out of his home. Because this was part of the inquiry, I needed to keep Daniel under my custody. I took us to the garage to work on his automobile. Sure enough, his vehicle was there and as Daniel requested, they gave a documented order indicating when he dropped off his car and the repairs they did. The automobile never left their possession. As a favor, the owner took Daniel to his accommodation for the meeting this morning. I told Daniel we were heading to a restaurant to speak further and eat lunch. At this moment, I was no longer concerned about his departure. There was enough preliminary evidence to prove he wasn't the murderer, but I wanted to know what happened between him and Rebecca. He spent the next hour and a half describing what sounded like a nasty online cheating wife scenario. He was on the point of tears during his story. Seeing the agony in the eyes of a guy I knew personally fueled my disdain for adulterers even more. I've been a homicide officer for a long time and seen some really ridiculous reasons to murder someone, like the guy who killed his brother because he ate the last pork chop, but now I can almost see why someone loses it and fires a shotgun at another human being. Sitting at that cafe, I realized I was retiring a month too late. I knew he was disturbed over Rebecca's infidelity and death. Nobody is that excellent of an actor. However, as a policeman, I understood he could act sad while still being the killer. After our lunch, I informed Daniel that I was letting him drive his own vehicle home, but that I would follow him. At the time, I had no direct proof that he was the murderer and his vehicle was in a garage in Fairview, so I had no cause to arrest him. There was sufficient reasonable doubt. On the way back, I phoned my lieutenant and updated him on the situation. He said that they still hadn't recognized the male victim. His fingerprints had not shown on any databases. The following several days were spent retracing Daniel's actions throughout the previous few weeks and up to the time of the killings. During this period, the forensic accountants examined the financial records of the 3 businesses engaged in the Fairview building proposal. It was vital to address the financial motives for murder. People kill for love or money. I was dozing at home when I received another late-night phone call. You would not believe the phrases that were shouting within my brain. Sophia was unconcerned about the phone call this time. The night desk sergeant informed me that he had just had 2 patrols respond to an allegation of gunfire at a hotel downtown. Daniel's room was severely damaged by gunfire. He was not wounded, but he was quite disturbed up. When I arrived, he was being treated by paramedics. Glass pieces from the broken glass pricked him, but that was all. He was still in shock from someone attempting to murder him, but he refused to go to the hospital. Instead, he requested permission to locate a safe location to remain before the person who attempted to murder him returned to do the job. I felt sorry for him and considered having him remain with me, but I wasn't going to put Sophia in risk for Daniel or anybody else. He'd have to spend the night at the station house until we could make better plans later. The following morning, Daniel got a call from Hamilton Realty on his new phone. His business was chosen for the building project, but not the maintenance contract. The worried person I saw in the foyer was the 3rd bidder, and his firm was awarded the maintenance contract. He was pleased with it. He said that the president chose him not just because of his reputation, but also because his nearest rival, Anderson Builders, was exerting undue pressure on his selection process, which he disliked. These behaviors become an additional aspect in his decision-making. Forensics made a breakthrough that connected the 2 shootings. They discovered a fingerprint on the doorknobs of Daniel's residence and hotel room. The print belongs to a career criminal with a poor reputation. Getting him off the street would be a pleasure. While Daniel was preparing for the project, he got a few threatening anonymous calls and emails. While it took us in a new route, it also provided motivation. This time, the attacks targeted his firm. There were just a few possibilities for equipment failures, accidents, and fires. With Daniel taken care of for the time being, I decided to start tracking Rebecca's movements. According to Daniel, my wife, and a few others, Rebecca lacked prudence in her dealings. Her credit card expenditures during the previous 2 months revealed an average of 2 or 3 trips each week to men's apparel shops, restaurants, and a 5-star hotel downtown. She was out living the high life with her boy toy. In 2 months, she accumulated more than $6,000 in credit card bills directly related to her and her partner. Daniel would not be responsible for them since the card was just in Rebecca's name. If he was, I wouldn't be surprised if he dug her up and smacked her hard. Instead, he may collect the life insurance he had on her. That was another motivation I had to consider. The Lovers Hotel would be my first destination. I hoped the security cameras captured a decent headshot of the person. Our cyber squad might utilize face recognition and the FBI database to assist us identify Rebecca's headless lover. I was correct about the hotel. They had high-definition video cameras at the front desk and captured the happy couple on many occasions. It only took the cyber team 4 hours to find an 80% match. The government began filming everyone who crossed the border years ago. It seems that a specific male with blonde hair, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, crossed the border from Canada around 4 months ago. As usual, the officials maintained lousy records, but after a few phone calls, I discovered that he arrived on an H-1B visa. It's no surprise our team couldn't identify his fingerprints. He was Canadian and would not appear in our routine database searches. However, his company here in the United States was in charge of everything, including fingerprints and criminal background checks. Of course, it gets to the immigration officers at ICE, who enter it into the database. At the time of my inquiry, ICE was 4 months late in scanning the data into its system. At the very least, the Border Patrol identified this man crossing the border and notified ICE, who contacted the State Department, who emailed the Border Patrol to confirm his visa. So, Anthony Reynolds of Calgary crossed the border, and after just 4 months in the United States, he seduced a former acquaintance before being assassinated by an unknown attacker. I phoned a detective in Calgary and informed him that one of their residents had been killed and that he could provide me with some background information on the suspect. It became out that Anthony Reynolds was a well-known pseudonym for a lowlife called Matthew Carlisle. He was a part-time performer for an all-male revue in Calgary. When he wasn't doing that, he was attempting to defraud women by convincing them that he loved them. He was a con artist. There were multiple arrest warrants out for the jerk, but he just vanished 4 months ago. They knew where he ended up, and now that he was gone, he was no longer their concern, but mine. They refused to accept the corpse for burial in Canada. I already knew who assisted him with the bogus H-1B visa and crossing the border. If he came over for what I believe he did, he was successful up to the moment where his head was explosively separated from his body. After the day, I headed home for the night. My wife had made me promise to be home on time today so that she could give me my retirement gift early. When I stepped inside the home, the scent made my mouth swim. She prepared my favorite supper. I'm more of a meat and potatoes man, but she has a fantastic dish for Pacific salmon with sorted veggies. The meal makes your mouth happy. It rests softly in your stomach, so you may reward your wife with an after-meal romp without feeling heavy down or unable to perform. If the cuisine was any indication of what my retirement gift will be like, I'll be performing for her for quite some time. The supper was delicious, and when my wife revealed what my true gift was, I sat stunned for a while. She had been taking a few dollars from our paychecks for years and depositing it in an investing account that would enable us to travel for the next 6 months without interruption. We've always wanted to go to Europe and see her extended relatives in Italy, and we can finally do it easily. Oh yes, we performed for each other. The following morning, we spoke over breakfast. Emma inquired about the status of my inquiry, but I could only provide limited information. What I could tell her confirmed her anger for her former friend's behavior. Cheaters deserve whatever happens to them, was my wife's latest remark. The more severe the adultery, the more severe the punishment, was an additional explanation. However, I felt using a shotgun to make a 3-inch hole in Rebecca's chest and dematerializing a man's skull and genitals was a bit overkill. But I'm a policeman, and it just means more work for me. Overall, I would want a fair dosage of utter humiliation and financial ruination for any culpable party. In the squad room, the report from our forensic accountant was on my desk. He examined the records of the 3 businesses competing for the Fairview work. Murder was often committed for romantic reasons or financial gain. This is the money portion. One firm was a limited liability corporation that was about to declare bankruptcy. The firm still had supporters, but it was subject to strict constraints. The other corporation was not formed, but rather a partnership. One partner had limited power over the company's ownership but not its operations. The primary partner was in charge of almost every element of the firm. The articles of partnership permitted the corporation to be dissolved with just 2 months' notice. The notification was designed to allow the other partners adequate time to arrange funding to buy out the separated partners' shares. According to court documents, it is precisely what occurred a few days before the murder. If the surviving partners fail to purchase the separating partners' participation, the firm will be dissolved and its assets liquidated and divided in accordance with each partner's financial interests. The accountant said that having just 2 months' notice was uncommon, since it wouldn't give the other partners enough time to arrange finance. Given who the partners were, I doubt they ever meant to use it, knowing that it would almost certainly ruin all they had fought for. According to a separate court filing, there was another application to dissolve the same partnership, but in a completely different manner. This action, however, was delivered to the clerk of court 1 day before the petition to dissolve the business partnership. He knew it was coming. The filing in this court would instantly lock the parties' funds. It effectively postponed the acts of any and all further legal arguments, but since it was not a commercial transaction, the business partnership may continue to operate until the court's ruling. This court filing was utilized to protect the petitioner while infuriating the respondent. The third firm was financially healthy but had far lower cash flow. It was a straightforward partnership with equal ownership. However, unlike the prior organization, this one did not include any weird rules to terminate the partnership. Its cash flow was lower, but the partners reinvested every spare dollar, leading the firm to increase 15% in the last 2 quarters alone. The forensic accountant's results verified the 2 suspects I had previously identified. Right now, it remained unclear who was responsible for the homicide. Being accountable does not imply that they were the real murderer. If I locate one, I will find the other. It was time to start shaking the cages. Time was running out, and I wanted to complete this before my final day at work. I stopped into the office of one firm to speak with one of my suspicions. The receptionist could not tell me where the guy was, but she did say he had been behaving strangely recently. It sounded like he was about to sprint. I went over to John Huey's home and parked far enough away so he wouldn't see me. While seated there, I saw Mr. Hughes and another guy having what looked to be a heated discussion. I knew the guy fighting with John Hughes instantly. The individual had an outstanding arrest warrant since his fingerprints were found at both Daniel's residence and in his hotel room. I requested backup and instructed the arriving patrol to enter quietly. They made the radio call while they were less than a block away, which gave me the opportunity to surprise the Wonder twins. Needless to say, one broke and fled, while the other went for his revolver. He merely received a flesh wound. I phoned for an ambulance as the 2 uniforms handcuffed Mr. Hughes, who made it about half a block following a trip to the hospital to have the doctor place a band-aid on the idiot's boo-boo. He and I proceeded to join the runner at the station house. I spent the following several hours in questioning discussing current events. The band-aid guy declined to speak, so I spent some time with Mr. Hughes. It wasn't long until he poured his guts all over the floor. After a brief chat between his lawyer and the district attorney, they reached an agreement. The information he supplied nearly assured that he would serve 5 to 15 years in jail. He acknowledged to hiring the hitman as a final option when Plan A ran out of time and he was outmaneuvered. He panicked and resorted to Plan B. Plan A was to hire the Canadian gigolo to woo Rebecca. He expected Daniel to get enraged and do something dumb, such as get himself arrested. When the articles of partnership were revealed, Mr. Hughes understood it was best. Daniel's financial security would be jeopardized if he had to get financing to purchase Rebecca's portion. Even though Canadian Bacon performed well, Daniel outperformed him. He filed for divorce 1 day before Rebecca filed to dissolve the company. Plan B was a hitman. Because dead individuals cannot win $6 million construction contracts, he reasoned that if he assassinated Daniel, he would get the project. The questioning of the hitman was more tough. He had been in and out of jail for so long that he understood how to play the system. He was a non-violent criminal until around 5 years ago, when he became aggressive. Since then, he has spent time for aggravated assault and is accused of other strong-arm robberies. He was just lately reported to have rented himself out as a murderer. After being presented with Mr. Huey's signed confession, he acknowledged to taking a job to assassinate Daniel Miller but denied ever attempting to. Okay, I anticipated this a-hole to lie. I don't have to enjoy it, but I did expect it. When I informed him that we had his fingerprints at the site of the double murder and a hotel shooting, he struggled to keep his food down. He was eager to speak after hearing about a capital offense. He negotiated a bargain to keep the needle out of his arm. The district attorney was up for re-election in November, so he desperately needed a conviction and began to see it as an act of good faith. Our wannabe murderer offered information that seemed to incriminate my other suspect, since he had seen the man twice that night. The second time, he attempted to murder Daniel by shooting up his hotel room. After learning that a hired murderer was involved, the prevailing belief was that Mr. Hughes provided the hitman with inaccurate information about Daniel. So he assassinated our nice Canadian, mistaking him for Daniel. And since Rebecca was a witness, he had to murder her too. Only later did he realize his error and attempt to assassinate Daniel in his hotel room. But now, after the guy confessed to one attempted murder and provided evidence that may lead to the real culprit, I had my doubts. In the event that he was speaking the truth about not being Rebecca's murderer, the DA consented to the agreement only if the information he provided resulted in the conviction of the other person or individuals he named. That was just what I needed after dealing with those two. Emma understood how to transport me back to the realm of the living after a day like today. She has always been there in the darkness. The following morning, I stepped in and drove over to Miller Construction's headquarters to speak with my old acquaintance. He appeared shocked to see me. I suppose the look on my face wasn't as subtle as I had planned. I told him he needed to clear his calendar because we wanted to talk about his whereabouts on the night Rebecca was murdered. He inquired if he may have a counsel present. After I told him it was a wonderful idea, he quickly called his divorce attorney and said he'd meet us there. It was not a criminal defense attorney. When questioned, Daniel described his actions on the night of the killings. Most had previously been verified, but I was curious whether his tale would differ from his earlier declaration. He very much followed the script from previously. Consistency is beneficial. He used other words but continued to tell the same narrative. If someone was speaking the truth, they would have done it almost exactly how Daniel did. Unfortunately, he left out some key facts. His lawyer felt a need for a change of course. He placed an envelope on the desk containing the certified reports and images obtained by the private investigator Daniel hired to monitor his wife. Needless to say, it was rather damning. Daniel had previously informed me that Rebecca was cheating on him, but according to this allegation, she was a cold-hearted lady. Anthony Reynolds, or Matthew Carlyle, or whatever you chose to name him, had been banging her blind for 3 months before his death. According to the article, he was only the latest of numerous adulterous participants. Daniel had been following her for the previous year and was aware of her relations with almost all of her partners. The lawyer was attempting to shift blame from Daniel to one of her past partners. According to the private investigator's report, more than one of them was screwing her over. A number of the lovers were not pleased to be tossed so casually. As my father used to say, any one of them may have had a grudge and wanted to exact their retribution. The evidence within the envelope was supposed to be introduced in divorce court. He cited infidelity as the cause and mentioned all of her partners in the incident. They were attempting to add another participant to the mix, returning the discussion to where it had been before the attorney handed me the envelope. I informed Daniel that someone in detention said he was observed leaving his residence the night of the killings and that the person also described in precisely the automobile he was seen driving away in. Around that time, Daniel realized he needed someone other than his divorce attorney alongside him. I agreed with him and advised him to contact his defense counsel. I had time to wait while he made his call. I walked out front and spoke with my next contender. The shift sergeant had already seated her at my desk. Introducing myself, I assured her I was nearly finished and would be with her soon. All I received in exchange was an anxious nod. Daniel's defense counsel was scheduled to be in court for the rest of the day, so would have to resume our conversation at the earliest tomorrow. I was not concerned about his being a flight risk, but I did encourage him not to leave town for whatever reason. I couldn't arrest him since I didn't have any tangible proof yet. All I had was an accusation from a convicted criminal whose narrative seemed unbelievable but was becoming more probable. Daniel was not anticipating this change of events, nor did he anticipate to see his girlfriend seated at my desk. While I took him out of the questioning room, they both stared at each other and then at me, certain they were in serious danger. Yes, I'm investigating a double homicide. Why else are you here? The talk I had with his girlfriend, Isabel Harper, was insightful. It seems that they have only been available for approximately 6 months. She said she loved Daniel and urged him many times to dissolve his marriage so they could be together. Their liaisons were limited at first, but when Daniel admitted that the end of his marriage was near, they increased their encounters to twice a week, albeit still very secretly. She didn't see why they needed to keep their connection private while Rebecca was messing around. Wonderful. She knew Daniel was married and had no qualms about banging him. What's up with these people? I have apprehended serial murderers who had higher morality. According to Isabel, Daniel contacted her the night before his meeting, requesting her assistance. He forgot paperwork for his presentation with Hamilton Realty in the morning, and since his vehicle was in the repair, he needed a ride home to get them. Rebecca could safely accompany him to his house since she didn't anticipate him to be there. However, when they arrived, she knew there would be problems. Rebecca wasn't only home, she was also entertaining her boyfriend. Daniel was infuriated. He recognized that his marriage was merely a name, but how could she bring her partner to his home? He stormed in, confronting both of them. She couldn't understand what was being said above the screaming. She saw Daniel shove Rebecca's boyfriend a few times, but that was all he did until Rebecca intervened. To Isabel, it seemed like Rebecca did not want Daniel to injure him. Daniel took a minute to gaze at them both, then turned and went away. A minute later, he emerged with the paperwork he needed. They returned to Fairview after dealing with ODOT and road work for a few hours. Daniel was not in a good mood, according to Isabel. Isabel stated it was difficult not to sense his fury against Rebecca for having her lover in his home. Daniel was not expecting her to spend the night with him since this was an essential business trip. He wanted to focus his thoughts on the presentation and their future. What about their future? They must have had plans. Someone with a suspicious mind would ask whether Rebecca's murder occurred because she stood in the way of their ambitions. Another motivation. She considered staying, if only to help him calm down, but his mood did not improve throughout the journey. She left Daniel off at the hotel, kissed him goodbye, and advised him to relax and focus on his presentation. She drove back just before 5 p.m. Did I believe her? My intuition tells me she's speaking the truth, which is usually correct. She renounced her right to counsel and promptly answered all of my questions. But something bothered me about her hands. There was something missing. Without that little piece of circumstantial proof, I didn't have enough to get a court order for a blood sample, nor enough to detain Isabel right now. All I knew was that she was in the wrong location with the wrong person at the wrong time. Even the hitman said she remained in the vehicle. If I can establish Daniel was the murderer, she may be tried as an accessory after the fact, but that was all. The following morning, the newest forensics report included 2 elements that would bring this case to a close and allow me to retire on a good note: fingerprints and a DNA match from the blood discovered in the shotgun shell box lid. But that is not how things turned out. There were no acceptable prints on the box or the shotgun trigger, and the blood did not match any DNA on record. The lab technicians were able to identify the blood as belonging to a female. That was wonderful news. The bad news was that there were no other identifying characteristics. Even the blood type was rather frequent. The DNA match would have completed the case well, but in the absence of that, I need proof from another source accusing one of the other participants. Then I may get a court order directing the courts to collect a sample for DNA testing. It was clear that the murderer wore rubber gloves. They did, however, cut their finger on the edge of the box of shotgun rounds, leaving just a little portion. The wound was not severe enough to pull the glove away from the finger, leaving it exposed to anything they touched. Since the inquiry began, only one female has been accused, and she does not have a cut on her finger. That is what was gone from Isabel Harper's finger. If she was my murderer, she would still have proof of the wound from the box edge. It was yet too fresh to have entirely healed. As everyone knows, paper wounds do not heal fast. I reviewed the cops' interviews with the diners of the restaurant where Rebecca and her boyfriend had eaten before they were slain. Everyone who saw the two lovebirds believed they should have been hosed down with cold water. One lady in particular was outraged by the nasty exhibition the lovers put on that night. This customer expressed her disapproval pretty strongly, as documented by the officer who collected her statement. According to the officer's report, she used some extremely colorful terminology when describing how the adulterers should be punished. The lady referenced in the report is well known within the department and well regarded. I knew her as well, and I observed she had a Hello Kitty band-aid on her index finger since the night of the killings. That meant nothing to my inquiry. There needs to be proof that she was involved in the killings or that she was present at the residence on the night of the murder. No judge would issue me a court order based on supposition. According to the contract killer, Isabel Harper was the only lady in the area that night. I had to either get fortunate or accept that I wouldn't be able to solve this one in time, because you can only make a case against someone if you have proof, and we had none. My instinct told me this guy was the murderer, but all I could do was follow the facts. I worked this case and gave it my all, but I knew it was finished when my time was up and I turned over my badge to my lieutenant. I'd no longer be a policeman. I don't care if this individual confesses to me an hour later. I wouldn't give it a second thought after 5 p.m. I would be Emma's husband, nothing more. Tomorrow, I had to bring in my successor for the case, sit with him, and go over all of the evidence gathered thus far. I've known Ethan Wills for years and is an excellent investigator. After I informed him about my suspicions and he reviewed the forensics, he began an aggressive inquiry into the matter. 2 days and I'm done. Despite the fact that I was still the detective of record, Ethan Wills became the main investigator. I sat in on Ethan's conversation with the DA regarding the case, and I addressed points as required. Of course, the blood test revealed that our hitman's blood did not match that discovered on the box of shells and the trigger, therefore he was not guilty for Rebecca's death. What about the Canadian thing? A footage from an ATM across the street from Daniel's hotel room proved he was guilty of the crime. So he was going away for attempted murder and a variety of other counts. Perhaps he was speaking the truth. He received no points for blaming Daniel Miller and Isabel Harper, since the forensic study indicated Daniel was not the murderer. Isabel Harper, on the other hand, lacks sufficient circumstantial or physical evidence to prove her involvement. Detective Wills decided to take a closer look at Isabel Harper to see if he could uncover the missing piece. It took him just a few hours to cleanse her as well. She had stopped at a Denny's on her way home from Fairview to get some lunch. The receipt's date stamp indicated that she was there when the killings occurred. So we had a killer on the loose with no clear information about her identity. Not being able to solve a double murder would be the end of my career. That was a negative. However, I was about to retire after putting a contract killer and the person who hired him away for a long period. For me, it was a plus. Even if Rebecca was a cheating skank, I wanted to solve her murder since the law said that she needed justice. The thing that annoys me is that, deep down, I knew who the murderer was, but I also understood the law, and violating a person's constitutional rights, especially because I'm about to retire, was not going to happen. So, what could I do? Daniel's divorce and defense lawyers were correct in claiming that a lot of persons were motivated to assassinate Rebecca. Detective Wills would need to review the list Daniel's private investigator had collected to see if he could construct a case against any of them. I had a sense this was going to be a cold case, and it would stay that way until the murderer made a mistake and offered us the physical evidence we needed to convict her. I glanced at the clock, realizing that my next to last day was over. I returned home and embraced my wife. We spent a nice night hugging, hoping that the next 25 years would be like this. I awoke in the morning to the aroma of coffee. My last day would include little more than sitting at the office. I was done as a murder detective. Emma waved me off with a sneaky grin, knowing how bittersweet this day would be for me. First and foremost, my professional career was coming to an end. Second, I was going to be the target of many jokes. Emma and I both knew that after my shift ended, I would walk away, leaving everything behind, literally. This case had left a terrible taste in my mouth. 2 previous pals turned out to be adulterous. Okay, maybe one came after the other, but why not separate, divorce, and start again without becoming what you disliked the most? I wasn't incorrect when I said I'd been the target of many jokes. Okay, I did not mind the balloons or the cake. It was my going away gift that stung. My fellow officers, with whom I had served for decades, bought me a walker to use after retirement. You know the type, the one used by the elderly guy in the film Up. Would you believe the idiots added bike training wheels, a bell ringer, and little girl streamers to the dang thing? Assholes. Needless to say, I adored it. I even tried it in the squad room, which was filled with laughing. It turned out that the notion came from both my lieutenant and the head of police. They said it was primarily their idea since I had previously finished all of the official procedures to receive my retirement. All I needed to do was give up my rifle and badge. My lieutenant accepted the pistol, but the chief returned my badge. He informed me that my badge number was being retired in recognition of all my years of service. This feeling was entirely unexpected, and all of my co-workers applauded. I truly got worked up as I politely accepted their gift. I did decline drinks at the end of the day, telling everyone I needed to go home and begin being a full-time husband to Emma. She deserved no less. Emma's response to the walker is something I will never forget. She laughed so hard that she had tears streaming down her cheeks. She eventually said that they were really doing it. I stared at her, perplexed, not quite sure what she meant. She ended up telling me, "Who do you think gave the chief the idea? They were too worried about offending you, but I told them to do it, and I would smooth it over." Did I mention she was the best? We were hugging one another tightly, laying in bed after a round of retirement sex, knowing that this was just the beginning of our new lives together. No more seeing other people's pain after telling them their loved one has been slain, and particularly no more late-night phone calls. It honestly felt good to know I wasn't a policeman anymore, no more commitment to the law and the sacrifice that went with it. As I already said, I knew who the murderer was. She was keeping a watch on Rebecca and Canadian Bacon the night they were slain. She despised the two's performance and expressed her utter unhappiness with how they acted. The fact that our murderer was female was confirmed by forensic evidence obtained when she cut her finger while opening a box of shotgun round. Her blood was found on the shotgun's box and trigger, but there was no match in any DNA files. The one individual arrested for his role in the incident did not see the lady at the residence. Rebecca was well known to the murderer, and he despised her infidelity. Shortly after the killings, the same lady was observed wearing a Hello Kitty band-aid on her index finger. And now I don't give a damn. I was in bed with my wife. Emma clearly wasn't done performing. She's quite fit for her age. I felt her right hand reach down and begin rubbing me. Her stroking was a little unpleasant. It was unpleasant because of the rough edge of the Hello Kitty band-aid on her index finger. Thank you for watching. Do you believe the genuine murderer was apprehended? Please let us know in the comments below. Do not forget to like and subscribe.